but basically the pacing was terrible, which kind of makes
Okay.
sense because I wanted to show the player that like the AI's thought process.
Hmm.
So the whole redesign since then was like, well, how do I show their reaction without it being like essentially somewhere between 5 and 10 seconds between every single dialogue exchange? Since I wanted like it to be
Right.
every dialogue option was like chosen, at least as far as what the player says.
Hmm.
So what I came up with is basically while the player's talking, so it's not like Skyrim or whatever where you read the text and then as soon as you select it, it's instantly on the screen. As soon as you select the text, it your character says it out over time, and
Okay.
while you say it over time, the emotions within it kind of have this pop up. So what this is basically, this middle bar represents the AI's opinion on a 0 to 10 spectrum.
Hmm.
So this heart would be like a 3 to 10 or something like that. So it starts out just based on the relationship, and then any emotions kind of move it up or down, doesn't matter. Guilt and frustration apply. I'm going to skip explaining that this time. I think I've explained it in the past, but it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, you can see the AI like chooses. So like this represents the AI could say the worst option, which would be this bottom zone, a middle option, or a better option. And that's just like on the 0 to 10 scale. So in the context
Hmm.
of a conversation, you say I like you, worst, like that's cringe, gross, middle
Hmm.
option is like okay, and best option is like, oh, I like you too. Usually
Hmm.
wouldn't be like as whatever, um, cut and dry as all that, but that's the general idea. So now this can all take place while other options exist in the background. So what happens after this is that where is it? Is that the text boxes kind of fly out of this heart thing. So that's the last thing that I was doing today. Sorry, this is super distracted, but I was really excited. So I apologize if this makes no sense, but yeah. So the long and short
Okay.
of it is now this has also radically changed what we're going to talk about today, which is basically
Hmm.
I finally found, I think, a really cool way for the player not just to see the AI's reactions but actually predict their reactions and have that as more of a mechanic rather than you seeing the effects of what you're doing, having some amount of like anticipation of it. So the perception opinion, this is just like the phase that I'm telling myself to keep track of things as I was working through it,
Hmm.
is basically the basis of the formula for their reaction to you. So if I'm going to say something that's like in a friendly context, then I know that because our friendship is like at a 5 out of 10, it'll start here. Now you don't actually know what the final opinion rating will be, which is like kind of represents their true emotions, because the emotions of what you say could knock it up or down, which is like this glowy bit. And then the guilt or frustration like a high guilt could make them be a little bit nicer, or rather stop them from being too mean. A really high frustration could stop them from being too nice. And then at the end of the day, it still jumps to whatever the closest reaction is. But
Wait, so is that
yeah.
is the meter measuring? It's measuring what you think it's going to be, or it's measuring what the actual reaction is?
So it starts out as measuring what you think it's going to be, which is why I was experimenting with having this heart be a blue color. So if you're anticipating something, which is the AI's choice, then it looks like this, um, where the player is actively selecting, like, okay, I think they're going to say the worst possible thing. Is what that would look like. And then,
I, I,
oh, sorry.
it's not coming together for me. So you're selecting you're selecting a dialogue option, right?
Right.
So are you also selecting something from like this meter, or do you
Yes,
select the dialogue option and
you're
something in the
selecting two.
meter?
Yeah, you're selecting two different things. Your dialogue option is right here. So
Hmm.
because so currently what's actually happening is you're predicting something they're going to say. And because you don't, and then your dialogue option is actually in response to what you think they'll say, is what this is. So this is kind of what I'm calling an irrational player choice. But a rational one, just turn that off for a second. A rational one looks like this. So normally you would see all of your dialogue at the actual text level. Where is it? Right there. Need to ignore this. And when you actually can see your dialogue choices, where is it? Then the AI has said what they're going to say. So this kind of passes into this.
Wait, so give me the order of operations here.
Yes.
The first thing I click on is the dialogue option that I want.
Yeah. So the first thing you do is actually like you're hovering over the dialogue options that you want. So basically,
okay.
Sorry. If you are initiating the conversation, it will look like this, and you won't have any of these predictive zones.
Okay.
And this is what I would call a rational player choice. So this is like a normal one, like, okay, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say, and then as soon as I say it, then I say it afterwards. And it would pop in like right below here. Where is it? And then all the player options are blue. And it would say, I like you.
Wait, I'm sorry, I'm confusing it. Wait, so the which I like you is the one you're clicking on?
So you just hit, you would hit the trigger button, and then that would kind of confirm this choice. So this is you hovering the choice, and you selecting from two different like emotions. So this just shows what one choice is. If you were selecting the other choice, then subtle would be highlighted, and this text would be the text for that. Actually, I've got better screenshots for this. Is it this?
So what's the second I like you then?
So the second I like you, sorry, I'm displaying what happens over time very poorly because I've just switched some. So that might not be the most productive. So as soon as you select it, then it pops up over here like a regular kind of scrolling chat.
Okay.
But all of the stuff that I was trying to explain but poorly is basically, let's see. Where is it? It is basically between when you're listening to them talk, you can kind of predict what they're saying as they're saying it. And then if it's correct, then while you're waiting for them to choose what they're going to say, you can be like, okay, if they say the worst option, so if they say the worst option, then I'm like already kind of pre-preparing my response to that. And that's what this represents, is basically I'm guessing about what they're going to say and thinking about what I'm going to say to that.
Okay, so meaning, first thing that happens is, or not first thing that happens, once you choose your dialogue option,
yes,
then as they're talking, then you have like another event of choosing options and is that you choosing what they're going to say, or what do you think they are saying, or are you choosing what to say in response?
You're choosing what you think. So yeah, you're choosing what you think they're gonna say in an abstract level. So you're like, okay, you're mind reading, and you're basically like, okay, they could react, they could say something in a worse way or a better way. I'm just going to go ahead and guess that they're going to say the worst way because that's close to what their opinion is. So like you can kind of see where their opinion is going, and the opinion pops into what they actually say. So whatever it's the closest at when it's their turn to actually talk, they will say. So you're kind of guessing ahead of time, like, okay, I think they're going to take this poorly, or they just don't like me very much to begin with. And based on that, I can start to think about my next option. So this is basically like, this is a way I would say normal conversation works while the other person's talking. You're listening, but you're also kind of guessing at like where they end up and thinking about what you're going to say next to some degree, or at least you can do that. So the player doesn't have to engage with all of this, but while they're waiting around for the AI to talk, they can guess about when the next time is their turn to talk and be thinking about that, not with the words, because that would be even more confusing than this is, but with just the emotional categories. Like, okay, if they say the worst thing, maybe I'll say some, I'll pre-hover wholesome. And the cool aspect of this is it rapid. I'll have a hard time teaching players this, I think, but once you get used to it, it rapidly speeds up the pace at which you can have a conversation in game, because at that point, because you can kind of it's sort of like in Pokemon, if you could kind of have it pre-selected to the move, which it does, I think. Does it pre-select the last move you used? I'm not sure, but if for some reason you could kind of pre-select, okay, I think I want to use this next turn, and then as soon as it's your turn, it's like hovered over the potion instead of you having to wait for it to be your turn, and then you go and select like the hyper potion, and then you can use it. You could like the other Pokemon's like doing their stuff, and like you have like a readout of like, oh, they're using this thing, and like your thing's asleep, okay, and like while that's going on, you could be selecting the potion to use, and then it's like, okay, it's my turn, you're already on it, and then you like lock it in. Is kind of how that works.
Okay, I think I see. I think I understand what it is. It seems like I can't tell if it's. I can't tell if it's making things simpler, or if it's making things like more complex. I guess like I understand kind of the mechanism that is mirroring in like a person having an actual conversation, but something feels like tedious about the just how many steps there is, and that's that's just an impression I'm getting from trying to understand it.
No, I think you're absolutely right. So I think the way that it actually goes, I mean, which is part of all of these graphics and stuff, is to sort of like explain all that without explaining it. So that can just run in the background, and you can ignore it totally and wait for, you know, the biggest goal that's behind all of this is I want to escape what I call park bench syndrome, where you just have two characters in pause mode that are just waiting. You know, like, okay, sometimes you have a follow mission that's like a you know, something, but really kind of like a fake. It's a park bench by another name, which is basically there's no good way in games to have dialogue options while you're doing stuff without it like coming to a pause state. So
okay, so I think this question will clue me in to whether I'm whether this is clicking for me. That like, is this like, I feel like there's a the question this might be dealing with is or I guess like the hope is, if you could just pre-select dialogue options, that would be the ideal. But is what's going on that you can't really without having this other category of interpreting their feeling, like there's like, you can't just like like if you're just pre-selecting what they're going to say next, there'd just be too many options. So there has to be like a step before that to categorize what your dialogue options would be, so that you have fewer to pick from. Is that what's going on, or not
I think
at all?
So. Can you say that again? Okay. I think so. I always have a hard time thinking in terms that are not my own.
Yeah. So like normally, like just like in a Pokemon battle, then like the player feels like the pace is more flowy if they're able to pre-select moves. But that only works with something like Pokemon, where there's you only have like 4 options or whatever it is, or like you have a very limited number of options, and then you're able to just like select while their move is completing. So that'd be the ideal thing to do. But since this is a conversation, and there's so many different, there's like tons and tons of dialogue options.
Yeah, the stakes
what this is doing
way
is
higher and more chaotic, inconsistent.
So this is like a series of like funnels to just like it's there'd be too many dialogue options to just pre-select. So this is just like a pre-categorization of like okay, instead of selecting from a list of 40 things I could say, then I select how I think the person is reacting first, and that gives me a more limited pool of options to say. But essentially, it's still just that same pre-selecting, like buffering the next conversation
right
thing. Is that kind of the goal?
Yes. A good extension of the Pokemon analogy. It would be like if instead of selecting a very specific move, which is like Fireball or like Lightning Store or like Cannon Spikes, instead of that, if before it was your turn, you were given a like, okay, what kind of damage type do you want to do? Do you want to do fire or water or leaf? And like that, and you might have like, well, you have 5 leaf attacks, like 3, things. And like, maybe there'd be some symbol that gives you a vague indication of like the different qualities of these moves, but you kind of know, but you could at that point, and then this I think fits the analogy very well. You could extend that list to include all possible Pokemon moves if there wasn't a cost to switching Pokemon, which I think is terrible. If there wasn't a cost, and you could essentially, this is what I call in the game super micros, create a massive like list, a dump list, where you just throw every single Pokemon in your arsenal's move, and then you select by that. And then once it comes to your turn, you're like, oh, well, I did want to use this move, but actually this Pokemon is low health and weak to them. So then you change your mind. But in general, it would allow you to like rapidly choose between a potentially very large number of options. Yeah. So exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
I feel like a step where there's still some level of like counterintuitiveness for me is that like the model I keep thinking of is forgot where this comes from, but there's a kind of a classic example in psychology about like people kind of think that they're reacting when I'm reacting to a situation. I think I'm reacting directly to the situation, but really I'm reacting to my interpretation of the situation. And if I have a different interpretation of the situation, then that changes like just the whole set of options I react to. So like the example people talk about is that there's a like the Harlem Globetrotters.
Yes. Yeah.
So like there's this thing that they do where they take like a bucket that it looks like they've been using it to like clean their like wipe like splash water on their face, and like it's like this bucket like full of just like sweaty water and stuff. And then they go up to the audience and they pretend to throw it on the audience, but really they've switched out the bucket and it's a bucket of confetti instead. So everyone's like, oh, and then it ends up being like this like fun thing.
Oh yeah.
So like
yeah.
It's like the example is kind of isolating the fact that like you're not reacting to their action, you're reacting to your interpretation of the situation. That you have decided that this is what's happening, and you've characterized the situation as this, and then you're reacting to that. So like I see similarity between like that phenomenon and like how this is treating conversation, where it's like you have an idea of how the conversation is going, and then you're choosing your dialogue options based on that. Like as opposed to like if you had a like a game interface, like in that situation with the Harlem Globetrotters, like it would not make sense to choose between like every option of how a person could react to this action of bucket being thrown on you. It would make sense to talk about what is my like fear reaction,
Right. What's the worst case or most likely?
Right.
Which pick your poison.
So like the thing that makes more sense to me, like thinking about it in those terms, is like, well, I mean, you tell me what do you think of this? Like, in my actual experience when I'm having a conversation, I'm not sure if it's if I'm deciding my options based on an an actual interpretation of how the conversation is going. If that's how I'm consciously thinking about it, or just like the next type of thing I want to say.
True.
You know. So like when I'm trying to think of like what type of super categories are going to be like the best funnels for like the next batch of dialogue options, then like I'm wondering if it's smoother to think about the like what would be.
So I could do it that
do you
way
think
too.
It'd be, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah. I mean, that's essentially what I was asking.
This type of categorizing and like either separating out the different sets of options or keeping them all together has definitely been a push-pull struggle, because it's like, well, but when they're categorized, then I can like, group them by like potentially useful properties or whatever. But then also the more like pre-categories there are, like the more overwhelming and just kind of like slow, boring, gross. So, and that's kind of what already happens with why I call them super micros, is I used to have like the meaning choice and then the expression of that meaning in separate groups, but that was really exhausting because really you want to see all of your options at once. So maybe this should go the same way, which wouldn't even change anything, because right now I'm just cropping the options to what you're predicting. But that's almost definitely what I should do. What I could do is I could automatically set I wouldn't have to do this, but I without changing very much, I could automatically set your prediction based on the options you're hovering, based on which option you choose about what you want to say next. And it might be that the super like mean thing you want to say only exists within like them being mean to you first or something like that, and you can kind of see it pop around and then react to that rather than the super at least it seems not natural choice or sub choice of like, oh, what do I think they're gonna say? So that might be really good.
I mean, I'm not sure, because I keep going back and forth of maybe I see not in terms of how you should model, but just like I'm trying to think in terms of conversation, how it actually feels. That like at first when I was thinking about it, something just seemed jarring about like kind of jumping back and forth between like okay, here's what I want to say now. What do I think is going on with you? And then what's going on with me? That seemed a little bit unnatural. But then like I'm thinking like if you're having a conversation that's like flirting with someone, and the person is getting
really thinking about it.
Well, yeah. Like in those situations, then like you are more consciously thinking about oh, like is she reacting this way because she is like flustered, or is she actually annoyed? Like there is like a conscious thought about like what do I think the other person is feeling.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that like that as like a like games, one way of thinking of games as being like trying to like chase a certain kind of fantasy, that kind of like crazy mind games, like there's something of that I think in this. I think it's definitely something that like I think like last night I rebuilt it so that the blocks wouldn't jump around as much, because before it was super, super messy, but I'm getting there. But one thing that's worth noting is basically, so the way that I'm designing the selection, let's see, I got these. The way that I'm designing the selection is actually with up to two analog sticks at once. And what that would allow you to do in kind of a hopefully brain dead way, like something that feels like a little bit easy, is if you start selecting your options and then you start to use the other analog stick, that would cycle through, your prediction, like your prediction of like their options. So you could kind of be scrubbing both and like, and like in that way with just kind of like, I mean, it's two movements, but like in that way, I think you could very like lazily explore options without like giving it too much thought. Just like see the different things, like, oh, that's kind of interesting, So, well, I mean, I'll definitely see about that. And I have to remind myself of this, of course. My goal is not primarily to chase realism. I'm inspired by realism, but my goal is a powerful, story, an emotional experience,
right.
That happens to be based on actual rules and not just, BS, whatever the game, whatever the story tells you. I mean, it's still fundamentally what the story tells you, but but it arrives at that point because of the numbers. Yeah, but so you're jumping back and forth between like, like, oh, I don't know if this is like really something that would be part of a conscious thought process, but well, maybe, I guess it kind of depends on how much.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like in some situations you're more focused on how you're feeling and what you want to say next. In some situations you're focused on like interpreting how the other person is feeling. Yeah,
that's a solution in of itself, actually, because what I've decided is going to be my band-aid for all problems is we sort of talked about this a little bit the last time, or maybe the time before that, which is what I'm calling like vibes, or like internal dialogue. So if something big happens, you kind of decide how you feel about it, and that comes with its own like effects. So the way that I've redesigned the first scene, but like all of the very significant scenes that could involve like the romance options, or like the, more like the high stakes, like if you're trying to make a move, how it goes, would be, let's see, where is it? Is it this thing? This graphic is just placeholder, but basically the idea is this would be like, if you're rejected or something, your feelings about it. Like I haven't decided, like it would be a case by case basis, but the idea then is like, oh, maybe if you're being overwhelmed by the emotions, which would make sense. And it's actually like a choice. It's not just like, I'm telling the player you're embarrassed or depressed. Like you get like at least two options. One might be rage and the other might be like, despair or something like that. At that point, basically I use the vibes as a temporary buff debuff kind of effect to change the way, usually by reducing your control over the options. So like you said, if there's a lot going on and you're overwhelmed, maybe the predictive capacity is completely gone at hidden, and you see what they say when they start saying it, not any kind of representation beforehand. And that's a big part of me rethinking the first scene. Is I was like, I really loved what we were discussing the last time about like the hero summons as like, okay, here's the hero trial, and Nazar potentially like, trying to lean your way, like wanting to believe in you, wanting everyone else to believe in you. And I realized that I save quite a lot of extra characters and steps if Nazar administers the trial himself to you and is basically like, oh, like at the same time as a conversation is going on, is like, I have to, I'm going to start punching you now, but like, it's not personal. I just like have to make sure that, you're the chosen one, or that you have the special abilities that everyone, like needs you to have in order for you to stay. Or I'm not exactly sure how that's going to go, but that would work here too, where basically the conversation is being juggled at the same time as the punches, but and maybe this is a more natural fit for the combat, and maybe not the dialogue at all, unless like maybe farther into the game. But the idea here would be, since the actions run on the same system as the dialogue, so the hope also is that it can be complex because it's the same thing for literally everything is these three types of things. Their internal thought process with the vibes, the circle is the actions, and the dialogue all use the same kind of layout. But and in this way you could predict the types of like combat attacks, like if he's going to punch you or kick you or something like that, that would show up as these zones. And it doesn't have to be communicated specifically. You just like are prepared for one of them or each of them, and have more of a lead time to guess about them than you normally would have. Like normally you're kind of waiting on visual cues, and this would be, a significant step ahead of that, where this could be, you could be interacting with this before they even initiate the action. Like if they're like about like walking over to you with, like fists raised, and you're like, oh, if they punch you, the default option of each one would actually be like probably the negative of like getting hit by the punch. But then all you have to do is scroll to a different option without even locking it in. And then the way the actions work is a like just like a little like arc line that tells you where to move your hand or your head. Doesn't matter. But the general idea of the scene is that you can easily predict and dodge or block like every single move because you're predicting it. And
so is there a possibility, I mean, maybe this is too complicated, of using a similar system with conversation, that there's an incentive to predict how it's going to go? Like sometimes, or some kind of like again, comparing it to an actual conversation that like,
yeah. She was like, there should be a reward for correctly predicting what people are going to say.
Yeah, like I could see it not always mattering, and just like kind of in some situations that the player might not be able to predict and mattering, just like in real life, that like, if you're, like, it's like what it's really trying to approximate is like the phenomenon of like, if you're really present in a conversation and you're really paying attention to what the other person is saying, then sometimes you get a better outcome to the conversation.
Right.
And I could see just like not having any, there wouldn't be like any negative consequences to not being predictive, but like, like let's say like if
that's a good point.
Like if you were if the person was arguing with you or something like that, and like you had like a response ready quicker, then like them, they would be convinced faster of what you're saying or something like that.
Interesting. Well, I mean, again, as my Band-Aid solution, that could be very much a part of a vibe effect, where like if you're, which allows me to turn it on and turn it off without it having to exist all the time, because there's definitely like that exact kind of thing, but all the time, like only when I want to, only when it's fun.
I feel like it wouldn't be too hard to like kind of isolate certain types of emotional like tags for responses that it would matter. And when like I'm thinking like, if you're in a flirting conversation and you're trying to be charismatic, then like, charismatic responses or witty responses and stuff like that would also have a greater impact, but then if it's just like a normal conversation, then responding faster or having a like pre-chosen responses like that, it wouldn't matter in a normal conversation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's so perfect, because like it's crazy. I've been chasing just making it work, but I feel like I'm stumbling onto a lot of things that I like really gave up on being reachable. Including stuff like, well, how do you get mechanically the experience of being confident? Well, like, okay, I can give the player confident options, but like it's just like giving players funny options. Like they just pick them. It doesn't necessarily like represent something that's resonating with the player. But like, would you feel confident if you're like, you're getting a real grip on the system and you're like, oh, opinions there, but I know this AI, like the AI character's like guilt and frustration is very consistent. It just like accumulates over time. So unless you like apologize or get into an argument or stuff like that, it's just like it's almost in many cases like mid to late game, it's like forcing their opinion to be like one place over and over and over.
Yeah.
So you could be like in many situations guessing, and it's also about memorizing their personality preferences for the different emotion damage types. You could be guessing with a very high degree of accuracy at certain points. So that as like an experience of confidence, like it's not just saying the confident thing, but knowing that it's the right thing to say ahead of time, or that like that will be one of your options.
Yeah.
That like immediately like, oh yeah, that would feel pretty cool in the in the right
or
circumstances.
Like if you're being funny, like the phenomenon of like good timing with a joke, like
right,
like making her laugh more,
Yeah, and that's something exactly. Yeah. I mean that's like the most pleasurable experience in the world is like you really care about this person and you're like optimistic and they're having a good time.
Something you said also made me realize like in situations of apologizing, then this could also work, and maybe there'd be a negative like consequence that you can include also of like if you say the wrong thing and then you apologize right away, then that that stops the damage. But if you wait, like if on the apology step, then you spend more time choosing options, then like their anger meter could be like increasing. I could see something like that.
Yes. Yeah. And this is something, that I like a lot of the other problems that I just kind of have given up on trying to find a way to do. But I think through by having that either exist as like a pre-chosen thing where like you can actually choose to be stressed about something with a lot of benefits. Like, maybe it like, gives you more time to think about things to simulate like, thinking really like racing thoughts or something. I'm not exactly sure. That's a great thing is I can just make up a rule set, and because it's an option, it's one rule set versus another for like a minute or something like that. Then it shouldn't be too punishing, or at least isn't completely unfair. But with that also, I had a really hard time with basically like the timing. Like, okay, are these choices in real time? And if so, is it kind of like a quick time event? How long you have to choose? And I call it thinking on pause time, which is funny because it's my username, but it represents it well, which is basically in a default state, if you have no like active vibes, which is just like like emotions affecting you in a significant way. If you don't have any vibes, then it's almost like purely turn based, which is basically time moves forward functionally like all the AIs wait, not in a total pause like visually, but in a kind of like looping at the current state. Like if they're doing the laundry, they'll just be infinitely like whatever putting it in, and then as soon as you like in a global world sense, as soon as you decide to drink your coffee, that moves the world forward one step, and then they're done putting in laundry, and then they like set it to go. So in the same way, normally you would have infinite time to decide what you want to say, but if it's something like an apology or like there's a vibe effect active that makes you stressed or like feeling really guilty or something like that, then any one of those can turn it into a quick time event where the dialogue option does have a limited amount of time. And my hope is that the quick time event running out is making it select one of the options you can see. So like, of course, like in most games, like with combat, get hit is not an option. It's just kind of like it timing out in terms of like you not doing whatever it wanted you to do. But in this case, I mean, obviously with dialogue, it makes more sense. Things timing out. I guess I could just play like, I mean, there's a lot of choices with the whole design of the UI and stuff, but it could just show like, like the line going down on like what the not reacting fast enough, which should be like the emotion would be like
Mm-hmm.
like hesitant or or stressed or like judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if you actually feel it, because what these options represent is how that will be perceived by the AI or
Mm-hmm.
by the character.
I hear that.
So
Right.
so it's functionally the same thing. Yeah, yeah. So and that was something that that's so I think it was like I had a joke when I was like trying to set up some of this like a year ago. And I was like, oh, interesting. You know, if I set up like this, you could do preemptive options. You could be thinking about it in the future. And Savannah was like, this is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I had really no idea what to do with it. And kind of, it's sort of like what you're talking about with like the not choosing an option. But one idea in that vein is merely like hovering an option for some amount of time without locking it in certain circumstances would connect to like having a facial expression without saying
Mm-hmm.
anything that again, like maybe if you have a vibe, or maybe that's like on the AI character, like they're just like extremely sensitive or worried about the player, and they're like, you know, watching
Mm-hmm.
you intently. So maybe there's some awareness of them having some special sort of vibe, and you're like, oh, you know, I haven't said anything, but I'm thinking about saying the mean thing, and like, you know, in
Mm-hmm.
some cases that could trigger a response as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see some, like a particular type of situation. Again, all the, I mean, I feel like this can very easily get to like a whole new level of technology of like how to write this whole system. But like there's a like with responding angrily to someone, it's like the most powerful if you the impact is the strongest if you say it immediately or if you wait a long time. If you say it like at a normal pace, then it's like that's like kind of the most normal kind of
Right.
level of emotion. Like if you interrupt them, yell immediately or right after they finish talking, then that would make them that would be like the highest type of anger perceived. And then
Right.
if you wait a long time, then that'd be like also like scary, but like in a different way. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And you can play with that. Sometimes you have infinite time to play with it because, you know, you're not
yeah.
under pressure, so you can kind of like, okay, that's something I could do. I don't want to do that right now, but you
Hmm.
know. And then other times it's like, okay, quick, gotta you know, line up all these things. And this
Yeah.
is also, I think it was 2 times ago we were talking about like the AI assistant, you know,
Hmm.
replay, and basically the whole like trauma system, which I'm now, that, I mean, that's not really a priority, but it works really well with this because it basically means that if you're ever replaying a section, it will pre-select all of your options for whatever you did
Hmm.
last time. It doesn't like do
Hmm.
them, it just like has them ready to go, so you can
Right. Yeah.
maybe on your first like playthrough, even if you're a skilled player, it's like way too much to like
Hmm.
meaningfully distinguish. But if everything's preset to whatever you selected the last time, then like on
Hmm.
try two, you could have a pretty solid chance of intentionally saying or behaving the way you wanted to. Um,
Hmm.
but as a cap, and this is probably getting too distracted, the idea is if you replay a section and you're choosing different options and getting the same outcomes, like as far as like being rejected or something like
Hmm.
that, that would eventually apply a vibe across reloads, where if you ask a girl out this way, ask a girl out that way, you know, do it while you're juggling, do like all these things that have small
Hmm.
emotional influences, and it's like rejection, rejection, rejection. Eventually, it would build trauma to basically like either lock off those options or something like that.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
One, because I think there's a serious risk that, you know, as much of I'm excited about uh, more powerful or, you know, like specific emotions or like, you know, interactions with characters, I'm also a little bit worried about how like dark it could feel for a lot of people uh that are used to like, you know, you kind of replay until you get the outcome you want, and that's not
Hmm.
necessarily the way it'll go. It's not my top priority, but like, but that's kind of all connected to this as well.
Hmm.
But yeah, I definitely I definitely need to keep in mind that even though it makes sense as maybe the way that it could be working subconsciously or maybe consciously, that there's like a prediction going on that you're building what you say next, that almost definitely by default should not be something that I'm like, hey player, go like, I know they're talking, but like go play around with what you think they'll say next real quick. Probably just probably just focusing on what, you know, what you're excited to say, and then be like, oh, that's interesting, it's kind of moving around this thing, oh whatever.
I mean, it must be, you know, like in game design in general, like it must be like the challenge of like designing for a different level of comfort with the system, like a lower level of comfort with the system than what you're at. I feel like that must be like a continual challenge of like, okay, how is someone going to experience this like the second time they're doing it, as opposed to like me, who's like, you know, been working within this for years, you know.
Yeah, I know all the formulas going on, and it's, you know, it can definitely still be dense for me, which is why I think a massive amount of work on the project has just been like how it's really important to me to represent what the AI is thinking, because like not only do games never represent that, they might represent the relationship, but that has no, you know, really much use other than knowing that like, oh, we're at the max relationship, you know, end game cutscene or whatever, or we're dating,
right.
It doesn't have any, you know, so that's always been important, but like having that without giving up it being like fun and light, a fun experience has definitely tough. Yeah, let alone, you know, people coming out from different angles. I am hoping though that the number of choices being very low stakes, because in most games there's like very few choices effectively, and they're very high stakes, should help people like, if I can encourage them to just kind of choose something very quickly for a while, they can be like, oh, this, you know, moving up, moving down. They don't have to think too hard about like what it means. But I am hoping that there'll be a very subconscious feel to it, but yeah, it definitely has been a challenge. Even just talking to people when I could spend, you know, a super long time trying to explain what I'm trying to get out is definitely tricky. Yeah, but it's very possible also that at the bare minimum, this will feel probably way better for combat, where games usually find some way to give a visual indication with like the enemy's animation, or sometimes icons of danger, like something's coming. Having it in a very consistent place, you know, maybe you don't have much warning, but like, oh, here comes an attack. You know, here's your options. If you do nothing, you will get hit. Hopefully that will, you know, that I've thought this a lot of times, and it was the case the last time that I had like the Magic combat working, where everyone's like, wow, this is really cool. Which is fair. The combat is, you know, is going to be the thing that like is understandable in trailers, and like moving a relationship dialogue boxes is going to be hard to get across in, you know, whatever.
I wonder if like, what do you think of a system of like two like levels of control in a conversation, of like if you had a like if there's always like kind of a standard model of how the conversation interface looks, and then like you had the option of like either I don't care about this conversation, and then it would like drastically simplify everything, and like you wouldn't like you could like it would gear things towards autopilot, and then you could have like take this conversation seriously, you know, and like you get like more control, and then like there'd be some conversations where like kind of automatically like it's simpler, and then some conversations where like it's automatically like the serious interface, like if it just is a serious conversation.
Yeah, I've done a lot of experiments with trying to do that, and part of like, because in a sense what I've been describing for the most part is still the park bench syndrome, because, you know, you're, you know, doing one thing right now, which is looking at the options. But there is a like let's see, these things are not correctly set up. But the last time I was doing that sort of a simplification thing is basically thinking of all of this entire interface as like one this whole conversation as one thing would be one of these boxes, and that could be like, again, like 6 is a pretty overwhelming amount, but let me just switch it to 2 would be good. But the idea of a conversation and a, you know, combat at the same time would be like this. And then the words, instead of, you know, being this very segmented scrolling chat box, would be like newsreel text that gets cut off that you could very easily ignore because it's just this tiny portion of the screen. I think is this the HUD? The actual HUD is like a cropped version of this, something like that. But yeah, and the text gets cropped beyond this box, but I very much doubt that I'll be having multiple people talking to the player at the same time. But certainly, you know, like the end of one conversation, the start of another, or maybe if you're like overhear someone and then you kind of have this as noise, but occasionally you might look over and see like a word that's interesting, and then you can select that. And basically the idea is whatever you're selected on would kind of have its full interface over here. Yeah, but yeah, as far as like a simplified, because you still want to like, I could definitely see the appeal of being able to make choices in a much simplified format. In general, I think that was actually the original vision for the preemptive choices, is that you can not only pre-hover what you're going to say, but you could pre-commit. And if it's lower stakes, maybe you don't really care what the actual words you're going to use. It's like the wholesome emotion is plenty.
Right.
So that definitely exists, but it exists within the whole interface. Another idea that occurs to me is maybe, you know, if the conversation is very predictable, you could maybe pre-commit to predicting, then saying what you're going to say, predicting, say what you're going to say, you know, like many steps ahead. And if it actually does go that way, then like you'll see yourself talking on autopilot over here, like interchangeably with them. And then the dream is realized. I'm right around the corner from playing this, so like I'm like sort of in and out of testing a lot, but like the reaction stuff is all good. So over the next couple of days, I'm gonna see what this feels like with what I've built so far, which is if I pre-queue up an entire conversation, I'll be able to do anything at the same time because I'm not thinking about that at all. Now it's conditional, which means like if like I talk like channeling a spell, so I could be interrupted, but like the pre-commitment is my character will attempt to do everything I've pre-committed to if the conditions are met for it to start.
I do like that way of thinking about it, and because not only does it like simplify things, but it also just mirrors real life of like you can choose, like having the option of just like autopilot this conversation, you know, or like
that would be fun.
Like to just be able to just like you know, kind of consciously make the decision in game that you would make in real life of like just kind of nod, you know, the nod and smile kind of option, you know.
Yeah. My hope is, and this kind of comes back to like the thinking on pause time, and maybe a big part of the game is like finding like meditation type mechanics, so you can get rid of whatever's bothering you and making you not able to like think at pause time. But as long as you're holding down the selection buttons, you can like pre-queue up like as much stuff as you want. You can, you know, scroll over all of the different contexts, you know, conversation, fighting, you know, you could pre-queue up, oh, you know, I think they're gonna throw a punch. If they do that, I'll block it. I think this person's going to try to shoot a gun at me. I'll try to dodge that. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
you could do all of that as long as you're not in like a stressed like vibe type state where things are, well, you can
Mm-hmm.
still try to do that in a stress state. It's just you would have limited time and it would probably be
Mm-hmm.
hard. But right. So at that point, you know, it's very much like real life where you can look around the room and think about all the things you're going to clean and objects you're
Mm-hmm.
going to put one place or another. Now you don't have
Right.
an AI that will hold on to all of that massive to-do list and execute it as you go. But this will. So like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, if if it's as simple as looting a box that is across the room, you don't have to be near about it. You can just look at it. And if it's like, you know, in one of these contexts, you can be like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna like take all the stuff in there. And then if you get close enough and your hand is just close, it'll start doing that thing. You're like, oh yeah, I did want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, the way that's gonna work. That doesn't matter so much, but that's the hope is, yeah, maybe in a manual real-time sense, this is pretty exhausting. But if you get a good feel of it, then at least the things you don't care about too much that are kind of autopilot mode, you could pre-queue up a lot of stuff and then not think about it unless something surprising
Mm-hmm.
happens. And then your choices would
Mm-hmm.
no longer be valid, I guess. Sometimes. I'm still back and forth about how to organize that, but currently I just have it where all your choices are specifically linked to whatever you're predicting
Mm-hmm.
comes before. Yeah.
I think it would be interesting if, like, I'm thinking, did you ever play the game Earthbound?
No, but I've talked to people about it a lot, so I feel like I
Oh yeah,
must have. But I've watched some
I
gameplays.
that was like one of my favorite games as a kid. They had a system with the combat where you know, it would be random encounter content combat, but if your level was high enough, then it would just give you an auto win.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Thank God.
so like yeah, so like I'm thinking like with what you're saying about like being able um to like kind of set
Oh.
things to go automatically. Like I
Oh.
could see with specific types of skills. Like let's say you like after a certain amount of fighting, then you could just autopilot fighting, and it would just pre-select all the raid responses. And then I could also see it with something like, you know, if your character who chooses the, you know, charisma option all the time, then like for some kinds of conversations, you could just choose like be charismatic, and it would just like pre-select all the most, you know, like charismatic options.
Yeah.
Something
I
like that.
thought about this a lot. And definitely I've swung back and forth across lots of it because right, this is like
Mm-hmm.
the format that it's like currently existing at is very raw, which is like all of the tools and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but
Right.
like the, you know, I think some of the most satisfying games like train on like the hands-on grunt work level and then find some level of automation, or sometimes it just becomes
Mm-hmm.
muscle memory.
Yeah.
But that very much appeals to me, and that was uh definitely a different idea than like the vibe system, but it could work the same way. That I used to call them mindsets, which would automatically organize
Yeah. Yeah.
emotional options based on a like very specific goal. Because I mean, one of the
Mm-hmm.
really cool things is I finally one of the things that I was like trying to do but not sure if I was doing, but now I definitely know that I've done, is I was trying to make it so that it there wasn't always a right option emotion, like
Mm-hmm.
in because like there's conflicting relationship values. So you know, the friendly option will always move the friendship up, but sometimes it hurts the attraction multipliers. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's definitely not a trump card whatsoever. um and even on like, you know, is every dialogue option about getting the highest possible reaction? Well, no, because, you know, if
Mm-hmm.
if it's going up but then snapping even higher, then you're building up guilt, or, you know, so like it's very open-ended, but that makes the automation a lot more appealing because like there
Mm-hmm.
is no solving it, because it very much depend like if it was crazy enough to the point where you could put the mindset like I want to prioritize all options that like trend more towards romance situations, I don't know if I could ever even set that up, but if I could and I wanted to, that would be very very chaotic because it wouldn't be obvious how you get there. You might be able to max out respect, but that might make the friendship so low that they just avoid you entirely. But at a simplified level, like, okay, I want to do all the things that will make them respect me more, or like grow the attraction, or that could easily be done and would be very intuitive.
Like what would be interesting about that is, like, let's say like you have like the charismatic mindset or the funny mindset that you could just like set, and like sometimes that'd be the wrong option. Sometimes it's like the person we wanted to have like a vulnerable conversation, and you set it to charisma, and it totally turns the person off.
Right. You got that 0.5% added to your relationship, but to their respect, chaotically, to their respect for you, but they hate, you said that in the moment, and they really hated that. And it could even be like, and that's one of my favorite things about the contradiction of like the opinion versus the reaction, is their reaction to you saying the funny thing could like be like, that was really inappropriate, which is like which is like worst case scenario. But the other ones, there might not be anything else for them to say to that type of a thing, because that might only be connected to that. So like if you say something like, hey, this is a joke you normally like, and their reaction's all the way up here, then that distance is converted into guilt. So like now they're mad at you and they feel bad about it, like even. So it's like, I'm very, very enjoying that.
That's interesting.
And to geek out for one more. Oh, sorry, we've gone over. To geek out to one more extent, if the frustration and guilt are actually synergistic. So if you get a really high of either, it actually. So there's the step that clamps by guilt and clamps by frustration. So kind of eliminating the extremes. If they get high enough, then it actually doesn't, when they choose their final reaction, going from like opinion to like the thing that they say, if the guilt or frustration is high enough, then it builds the other one up. So like if the guilt is so high that like they're just desperate to like say anything nice no matter what, regardless of what they're actually feeling, this whole distance turns into frustration. So like even though they're so guilty that they feel like they have to say a nice thing, if they can only think of a mean thing to say, or sorry, if they're so guilty, if they're gonna say a mean thing, that's actually very close to their actual emotion, like relationship wise. So that you could have a like very low friendship, but they feel really guilty. The really high guilt makes them want to find something really nice to say. If they only have something really like mean to say, that's actually very close to how they really feel relationship wise. So that doesn't cause any problems. But if they have what's it called? If they like feeling very nice, very, very frustrated, then like how they actually feel will accumulate the other side. That was the most posh explanation. But anyways, doesn't matter. The farther away how they really feel to what they say, builds up the guilt or the frustration, where basically at the end result is, if you have high enough guilt and that isn't dealt with, they will inevitably gain max frustration and vice versa, because it will draw their reaction to be far from what they actually feel.
Right.
And my hope is I could just trigger something for most characters if they feel extremely guilty and extremely frustrated. Like that's got to be a great fight, I guess. I mean, the story matters. I'm having a good time, but with the math and stuff, I've had some big wins, but pulling it back. But yeah, cool.
Well, if there's a scene that you want to discuss, I'm sorry, we spent all our time geeking out about your new system.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry about that.
No. That, I mean, I think that's really good, and I extremely appreciate the like the caution, which is something that I usually realize the very hard way after like building it out and then being like, wait, like I don't know about this, because it's just not very fun at the end. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but good. And next time, I mean, what we'll see, but next time I should have it like playing. So then we'll see how that feels.
Awesome. Yeah.
Mm.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks so much. Oh, here's the terrible screenshot of like a very long time ago of how I used to have the interface.
What's the difference between the cubes and the
so the cube,
the squares?
Like this was when I was focused around juggling which conversation you wanted to have as like a choice to be like, no, I want to talk about this, and like kind of wrestling over it. And it was like, this was like the worst like thing to interact.
Yeah, this is a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, it was absolutely awful. But only like after making it, I was like, oh, like it's really not fun to think about what subject you want to talk about. Like, yeah, but within the conversation, because like that's the stupid thing with this too is like, you know, conversations are only one conversation because you're choosing where it goes next. Like you don't have to hold in your head all of like the separately categorized things. That is definitely a sin that I need to be very aware of. Is like, okay, do not over categorize on the player's behalf. Here, I put this in this other folder for you. What do you mean you didn't like it? All right, but thank you so much.
Cool.
I'll talk to you again soon.
Talk to you again soon. I'll see you.
Bye.
Bye.